and welcome to this webinar recording of From Diagnosis to Triathlete, a young girl's inspiring diabetes and exercise journey. This is the final of our patient-led festive webinar series for 2026, and this uplifting webinar will be led by Pemberton, diabetes specialist dietitian at Birmingham Women's and Children's NHS Foundation Trust. Along with her parents, Caitlin will explore her journey from type 1 diabetes diagnosis to sports ambassador. For free further content, please visit our SBK website at www.sbk-healthcare.co.uk or our diabetes website www.diabetes-nnf.co.uk. Thank you, and I hope you find this webinar useful and educational. Thank you. So I'm now pleased to hand over and introduce your webinar chair today, John Pemberton. John is a diabetes specialist dietitian at the Birmingham Women's and Children's NHS Foundation Trust. So over to you, John.
Cheers, thank you. At this point, then we should introduce Caitlin, John, and Anne-Louise Pridden. If you want to hop off and mute in your screen and come and say hello. How you doing, guys? You all right?
Hi.
Yes, this is going to be a bit of a strange one because we're going to be having a conversation between ourselves, which is normally in a clinic room and between ourselves. But in this case, there'll be a few people who are really interested to just really hear your story from diagnosis to where you are now. We've obviously prepared a few slides, which I will pop up on here just to kind of keep us on point and sort of keep to the relevant topics. But you okay today?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. Right, let's see if we can get this to work. All right, so let's see. Slideshow. Okay, can you guys see this your end?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So obviously we're introducing this as sort of the journey through type 1 diabetes, trying to put the athlete first. So I'm going to sort of maybe pose some questions to yourselves as we go through to try and walk through this journey and allow people who are listening an inside glimpse to what it's like from a diagnosis perspective, but what it's also like to be a young athlete with being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, the specific challenges to that, and really how you've managed to have, through a challenging journey at times, come out to where you are now in a really good place. So I obviously don't have much view of this, so I'm interested to get your perspective as a family on this. Obviously, I met you around about diagnosis, but is this a fair depiction of your family life before the diagnosis?
Yeah, that is pretty accurate, I would say. Very sporty. Love to do a lot of things together.
So you'd be, yeah. So before, obviously, you and William were doing sort of triathletes. What would a typical week look like in terms of training and competition before you was diagnosed?
I would train pretty much every day at like my affiliated club. So would swimming be Worcester, cycling is with Wire Forest, and running at the time was with Bromsgrove and Redditch. And I would just go to my training session from it depends from like an hour to an hour and a half at that age. And I just go every night after school. And then on the weekends there'd be some competitions, or if no competitions, I just have a normal training session.
So at least anywhere between 10 and 15 hours training, potentially competitions on. And how old are you at this stage?
Um, in those photos, I think I'm like either 7 or 8, I think.
Yeah, okay. Good. And sort of John and Anne-Louise, sort of, you obviously got a very active family, and that was something that was obviously important to you as parents. Kind of how was your involvement in sport? Did that influence Caitlin, do you think?
So we were always part of sport. We'd always volunteer. I was from a very much a swimming background, and it was just a case of keeping them busy and doing things outside of school. It wasn't necessarily competitive at all. It was just somewhere to have fun. They created great friendships, especially within the swimming, because everyone around them would be doing 2 to 3 sessions of swimming, and it wasn't intense. It was technique and everything like that. The cycling, again, technique and just fun, and along with the running. So it was just a way of actually being around other people outside of a school setting. But both my wife and myself were incredibly competitive anyway, and it was just a great activity to be a part of.
And it sounds like you had a bit of competition with your brother as well, Caitlin. Is that right?
Yes, I did not like when you kept on beating me in the littlest of things.
Good. So competition is running through and through the family. So that's good. So that kind of gives a bit of an idea in the people who are listening what life was like before diagnosis. And then obviously just after Christmas 2020, you obviously were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Tell us a little bit about, maybe as a family or Caitlin, whoever can remember this best, what the kind of the lead up to that diagnosis was, what was happening, what kind of symptoms you were experiencing.
So I would say because I see Caitlin in her running clothes and in a swimming costume, I noticed that she was losing a lot of weight. And when she was going to bed at night time, she kept taking a water bottle to bed and then refilling it, and obviously going to the loo a lot in the middle of the night. And I monitored this for, I suppose, about a week and thought this isn't actually ending, it's getting worse. And she was looking quite gaunt in the face, very tired, quite lethargic, and also very grumpy, a bit moody. And I
More,
actually
more,
said,
more so than usual?
I would say that era and the teenage era sort of can meet in the middle. Um, and then she was doing a running event, a big running event. We were all doing it, and I went to help her put her running clothes on. And I thought, oh my gosh, she still fits into these running leggings, and but she should have grown out of those by now. So that was another indicator. And she ran, she did the event, which I can't quite believe now looking back, because I think it was 2 days later she was then diagnosed as a type 1. And I think I said to John, actually, I said, I don't want to be right here, but I think she's diabetic because all the signs are leading that way. So it's one of those worrying discussions you have and a little bit of shock because you don't want to be right. And then I took her to the health centre on school on the Monday, and I said, please, can you dip her wee? Because I knew the doctors would be absolutely rammed after Christmas, and they just said, you need to take her straight to the doctors. So when we got down there, they said, right, we'll finger prick her. Yeah, we need to get her to hospital straight away. So I said, yeah, we'll go to Birmingham Children's, please. And the rest is history, I
Yeah.
think.
Caitlin, can you remember anything of that time of that? Your mum obviously just described you to her, you visibly lost weight and obviously it was impacting your performance. Do you remember anything about that or do you have any sort of memories of that?
Yeah, I pretty much remember it quite clearly. I know I didn't because I was so young. I don't think I picked up on what my parents picked up because I didn't think I was getting thinner. Like I just didn't. At the time, I wasn't looking at my body at like in the mirror. I wasn't looking at thinking I'm looking really thin. I do remember getting up. I think it was like 3 or 4 times in a night just to go to the loo. And then I remember one day saying to my mum, we were having breakfast, and I said, Mum, I just love water at the moment. I don't know what's going on. And I like juice. And I just suddenly said, I really like water. And I think that might be an indication as well. But I do remember it was the first day back on school, when I went into school, and even my teacher said, "Are you okay?" Like my form tutor said, "Caitlin, you don't look very, are you tired?" And I said, "I'm a little bit tired." But because it was the first day of school, I think that's just a bit weird because you've just had a holiday, a bit of time off. And then I just remember my mum coming down and just saying, "We just need to give you a test." And then I was pulled out of school that afternoon, and then I was taken to hospital. And then I just remember getting there, and just like learning about everything in the first like couple days, like the carb counting, um, and just all of that.
Okay, so it's interesting to get sort of the different perspectives.
Mhm.
Obviously, your mum's got a close eye on the sort of the visuals from the pit appearance perspective, but for you, that sort of liking water when you've never really liked it before was that's just how thirsty you must have been at that point. And it's good that you caught it early. I mean, you've obviously picked up the signs there. You've gone to the health centre, got into hospital, and prevented escalating to diabetic ketoacidosis. So first of all, well, obviously, well done for picking that up. And I guess that obviously comes. with a bit of disbelief once the diagnosis comes in?
Well, I didn't want to be right, but I knew I sort of was, and I think the shock is awful. I think shock's quite underestimated. I think it's a really overwhelming feeling. And you sort of panicking inside, but you're very calm on the outside because you want to show a united front for Caitlin, really. And then, of course, we've got so much to learn, and so much, especially when, you're then learning about carb counting, etc. So I think it was a huge learning curve, and a week in hospital was definitely something I hadn't expected.
Yeah. What was your initial thoughts, Caitlin? Did you have any thoughts, or were you just kind of going moment by moment because you weren't thinking that far further forward?
The first thing when I went to the doctors and they officially diagnosed me, the first thing I said was, can I do sports still? It was just sport. I just wanted to do sport. And they said, and obviously you can do sport and everything. Um, but that was really the only question I had in my head at the moment. And then I just remember the nurses like coming around my bed and they were just like telling like my parents what to do. And then I was like sort of listening, but I sort of was just like lying in bed.
Yes, just kind of like shock in some ways. What about you, John?
It was I think, very different because Anna, we spent all the time in the hospital, and I would come in. I still went to work, but then I'd come back, and I would end up spending most of the night researching everything I possibly could to try and get a grasp on it. And then when I'd come in on the following morning, because we still had William, so I had to get him to school. So when I got him to school, or when I'd done various other things, I'd then come in and say, "This is what I found out," and then yourself or the rest of the team, or Anlu would then end up saying, "Oh, this is what they've spoken to me about last night." And I go, "Oh yeah, I know about that bit. Can you tell me a bit more about this?"
Yeah.
And it was very, very quick. I know that very, very early on in the journey, I was quickly asking about CGMs, and it kind of helped that I was going away doing my own research. Anne-Louise was in the hospital kind of in a daze almost, because there was a lot of information coming to, and she couldn't get away from it. I could, because I still had to look after William. So when I came in, I was always that little bit fresher, but I'd also have increased my knowledge by just reading, finding out just anything I could to find that little bit more out. I also spoke to a few people who were our friends, actually Caitlin's godfather, who's a type 1 diabetic, and just spoke to him about, can you give me any information? And that helped, because he was like, right, this is what the initial stages are like. So I know, unlike some families, there's no diabetes around at all, but we had a godfather. Um, Actually, Caitlin's pediatrician is a diabetic. No, podiatrist. There we go. So not pediatrician, but we were subjected to it before, so we weren't going in with a completely blank slate.
Yeah, and I think something, Caitlin, that you said that really struck me, and that was one thing, certainly when I met you the first time, sort of, it's within a diabetes team, what happens is someone gets diagnosed and someone pops down and says, "Oh, we've met this family and they do this and they do that." And obviously with your family and specifically with you, Caitlin, it was kind of, she does a lot of activity and a lot of exercise. And obviously for you, from the first thing you said was, is this going to impact me being able to do all these things that I love? What's going to happen? And really, that was the only thing that came into your mind, which is shows how important it was to you. And I think part of this, I think something that I wanted to sort of discuss and sort of find out from yourselves really is um, often it's very easy to get seen as a person with type 1 diabetes when really you see yourself as something else first. And for you, you're athlete first. Person with diabetes comes along for the journey, but it's kind of athlete first. What was your experience like of that? Was it always in the initial stages, so it's type 1 diabetes, athlete second, or athlete first, type 1 diabetes second? What did you feel?
At the time, um, I just wanted to do the sport, and I more likely relied on my parents in the first like bit of it because I was really young, and yes, I wanted to be independent, and I was independent. But I just wanted the help from my parents. And it was just the whole trial and error of the aspect of it with training, and like trying to avoid the lows because then that means I have to pause in training, get out, have a drink of Lucozade or whatever. So we were trying to run higher at the time, just so I wouldn't miss the training because I enjoyed it so much.
And what was your sort of feelings, both John and Louise, in terms of the education information that you received from the beginning, whether, from that balance of athlete versus person with type 1 diabetes, what was your feeling at that stage?
I think all of it came initially was very much this is what you do. You count your carbs, you do this. And I remember very early on we were saying, okay, so what do we do about sports? Because this is a part of who she is. And it was with the discussions that you gave where it was going to be trial and error. And for us, that's, well, in a weird way, well, that's not good enough. We need to know. We need to make sure our daughter's safe. We need to make sure that she can do things. And so in that instance, it was quite frustrating. It was not annoyance, but frustration that it couldn't just be one size fits all. But we worked and realized that we had that conversation with you. I think it must have been the Wednesday because she was doing a biathlon on the Saturday. And you said, right, give half the amount of insulin. Let's start her off with that and let's see what happens. And she had a phenomenal race and she ended up winning it. And it was like, that was a catalyst to kind of say, actually, diabetes isn't going to stop me doing anything. We've just got to manage it really, really well. Um, and it was a lot of trial and error. And if you look in books, they'll say, do this, do that. And most of the time we went, well, this isn't working. And that's where the literature, I don't think always is in line with an individual athlete because the literature takes a broad spectrum of people and does, here is the average for that person. But if you're 9 years old and you're not average, how does it help you? So we did in the early stages, we ran incredibly high, really. We were always up at 12 to 14. We knew that was bad and we'd always try and get her down. But at the same time, every single time she stopped because of going low, she felt worse for herself. And that was the big battle that was in our life at that time is Anne-Louise and myself taking the responsibility of thinking about those carbs, thinking about everything like that. So Caden could just be a child and just be her. So there were a lot of conflicts at certain points.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a few things that I'll just pull out from there. Obviously, being involved at the beginning is I I think it's so important, first of all, to explain to people and be upfront and honest that if you're going to be doing a lot of activity, it's possible and you should absolutely go from it from the start as long as it's, kind of you're not coming straight out of DKA, a bad DKA into doing it. But if you've had, a good few days of insulin and just to start back in gently to make sure you don't have the mindset that this is going to stop me, but also being upfront and honest that it is going to take some trial and error. It's not going to take a bit. It's going to take a lot of trial and error. And if you're expecting it to work perfectly first time, second time, 10th time, it's unlikely to do so. All that's I understand, as you say, it's a frustrating to hear that, but there's nothing worse than also hearing, oh, this is what you do and it's going to work, and then it doesn't work, and all of a sudden you think, oh, this isn't actually, this isn't going to work. So it's quite interesting to hear your side of that for there. And I think that's a few things that I this is me reflecting, and I was really interested to hear your side. So I have spent a lot of time with your mum and your dad, and sometimes with you, Caitlin, and we'd be looking at downloads, we'd be explaining where things are going on. Your mum keeps all these detailed records, and we're looking through things, we're trying all these different things. And I mean, I was frustrated. I was frustrated because I really wanted to be able to help better, to be able to offer something that was really going to work. But when you were doing 15 to 20 hours of training, different modes, different intensities, different times of the day, different sort of nutritional states, it is unbelievably difficult. So, and obviously you said, Caitlin, the worst thing for you was having to stop. So you would rather run high and finish than have any risk of stop. What do you sort of remember about the injection times, and um, what was your overriding sort of feeling at that time?
Um, I think with injections, I've got a strangely high pain tolerance. It's very weird. So I didn't mind the injections at all. Like I was happy with just injecting for I think it was like 4 years or something like that. I was generally fine with it. Um, yes, occasionally there would be I mainly injected on my legs. Um, but I think it was just like managing it with sport became increasingly difficult. Like if it was particularly hard in swimming, if I had to get out and then have an injection. Um, but I do remember wanting to learn to do it myself because I did have my parents inject me the first, like, I think it was day or two when we got home, and then I said, "Oh, can I try it?" Because at the end of the day, however long I'm going to have be on injections, they're not going to always be there and have to do it for myself. So I learned quite quickly to inject myself, do it correctly, and then I just kept doing it until I was comfortable without them being there, and then they knew I could inject. Um, but I think it definitely, the one thing that really helped was when I did come onto a CGM, because that just kind of like, it just helped us a lot more, especially with training and that.
Yeah. And John, I'm going to put up some. So people who are looking at this will probably go, "Oh wow, there's only 33% in the range, and there's some like 64% high and 44% is high overall." But when you throw that in the context of everything that I've just described, and also with a young person who's strong-minded, who come hell or high water is not going to stop doing the activity and would rather run higher for that reason. And the changes in insulin sensitivity from all the activity. This was as good as we could get it in general, especially coming out of the honeymoon period for some time, despite an unbelievable amount of effort from on your side and lots of suggestions and meetings. Um, and then obviously this has started to have some impacts over time on Caitlin's performance and sort of growth and weight as well. So what do you remember as a family, or whoever wants to sort of discuss this around this time? So the sort of honeymoon period's finished. Diabetes is becoming harder to manage. There's not wanting to stop because of low glucose levels, and then the performance is not as going as you'd want it to, along with injuries. What was that time like?
I think, first of all, when we first came out of hospital and for the following, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years, I kept a file every single day, and of her bloods, of the carbohydrates, how much insulin she was having. And also then moving forward, we had a detailed record for yourself of, I think it was maybe for a week or 2 weeks, we wrote down absolutely everything she ate, because we needed to look back at a detailed picture of what was actually going on with Caitlin and her growth coming out of the honeymoon period, seeing what effect some carbohydrates might be having on her, and also when to eat, especially when she was then going off to do sport. So that was massive in just trying to be organized, but keeping that up for years, to be honest, because you don't remember looking back unless you've got it written down. And that built up a great picture, I think, for ourselves and for you. And then with that information, we could then move forward a little bit with, well, how are we going to try and get it more in range, I suppose. Would you say, John?
Yeah, I think that I actually forgot about how much detail we put into every single week, every single day, writing everything down. And that was the best that the slide you've got on there, that was kind of the best that we could come up with. And we were putting a lot of effort into all of that. But I do remember that the further we got in, the performance dropped. The which then meant that Kaden was becoming frustrated. She wanted to do well. She wanted to still be there and do everything that she wanted to do, and it was limiting her. Um, and it was an incredibly frustrating time because we weren't doing things half part, half a job type thing. It was very much everything we could possibly do, and it just wasn't working. She was on the lower percentiles on growth. She was still quite underweight. So that's where frustration was coming. And as you got on the slide there, the confidence was beginning to diminish. And this is a really confident young lady who was determined. She wasn't going to let things stop her. But if you're constantly getting these knockbacks, it has a massive impact. And I think if there hadn't been support from Birmingham Children's or certain people that were around us, it could have been quite easy that we'd just gone, this is too much, and just stopped.
And Caitlin, at this time, because I remember seeing you in clinic, and then I think you had some sessions with the psychology team, which I think you've said since have been was very helpful. Because just as your dad was describing, there's a lot of things happening here. You're a young lady who's wanting your independence. Your performance is not going as it wants. Your growth isn't going as it wants, and sort of frustrations kicking in. Can you remember those times? Can you remember like what was useful with the psychology? What sort of things helped you at that time?
Yeah, so when my because the thing is though, when it came to training, I would be fueling my body so well, and my parents would always make sure that I've got the like enough energy and all of this, but I was still underperforming. Like even in training, I wasn't hitting times that I needed to become better, and I slowly got better, but like my strength got better, but it wasn't to where it should have been. So then when it came to racing, from where I should have improved from the training, I didn't. And then I wasn't getting PBs, um, which was, it just became like a battle of really like just wanting to still just keep going. And like the confidence, it did drop. And then when I had the psychology sessions, that helped a lot, just like saying things and like just looking back on the like 5 years I've been diagnosed, and um it just sort of helped just like see things in a different way, and just like saying that like it's okay that all of it's happened, and you just like have a reflection what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some psychology personally, and certainly that what you're describing there really speaks to me because you've got all this stuff going on in your head. You can't make sense of it, but it just keeps going round and round and round. And then when you're able to speak to someone about it who's maybe independent of you, you're able to put the pieces in place and see it from a different place, which it sounds like that was similar to you, and that sort of opened up the opportunity to I guess during those times you need a lot of people for what your dad said. You always had the psychology. You obviously got a massive amount of family support, connections with other people from type 1, and then obviously acceptance, as you said. But I think we're remiss if we don't mention Molly. So tell us about Molly.
Yeah, she's a gem, honestly. She's my assist. Well, she is an assistance dog, and she's just there when it comes to like the hard days. Where I just don't want to speak about anything, and she'll just sit there and just be a companion.
Because I know, Anne-Louise, you mentioned Molly a few times. You brought Molly in to see us as well, which is lovely. What did you notice, like, as with Molly?
So I think if I go back just one very small stage, when Caitlin was diagnosed in hospital, our older dog had to be put to sleep that week as well. So in a family when everything goes wrong in 1 week or 1 month, and John was doing research, I was doing research as well in a different way, and I was reading about hypohounds and medical detection dogs, but we waited 18 months before we got Molly because having a CGM does not qualify you to have a hypohound or a medical detection dog. So I was angry from the start about all this, and I needed to focus on putting my anger into something positive. So I made a flippant comment to John one day and said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll find a probably a Labrador and we'll do it ourselves." John's science teacher at school had just had a litter of labs and sent a lot of videos, which was the worst thing for me to look at. And then we decided we'll do this ourselves. We'll train Molly ourselves. We took Caitlin to see the puppies, not telling her that it was for this purpose, and we gave her Molly and said, "She's yours if you want her." So with Molly, we started training with an amazing dog trainer, and she had lots of exams and stages to go through. And I think what I wanted for Caitlin was, we noticed from a very early start with diabetes that, I know she got her Dexcom early. That was amazing. But we'd always, how are you feeling? What are your bloods? What have you eaten? And I think those questions, that's because we're parents and we care, but it was quite a lot of bombardment when she came out of school. But Molly is not that reason. Molly is never going to ask you any questions. She's going to be happy to see you all the time, even if you've been out into another room. 10 minutes later, she's wagging her tail and happy to see you again. So I wanted Caitlin to have a friend and support, but also, being as she's an assistance dog, she can go anywhere with Caitlin. So she goes to all her competitions. So she's there before she gets on that start line. She's there at the end of the race, whether it's good or whether it's bad. There was always a Molly there. And of course, because Caitlin competes nationally all over the country, all these other triathletes and swimmers all know Molly. So of course, I don't think they actually come and see me when I'm holding. I think they're coming to see Molly. But for Caitlin, there is that constant friend that she could tell Molly absolutely anything, and Molly's not going to tell anyone else. So Molly, and also for me, I'm going to say, and for the family, having Molly has helped massively. Just to always see a happy face when maybe you haven't got your child happy in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always an absolute beauty. I would second that.
Mm.
And I guess then that takes us to sort of a change. So Caitlin, you've always said you didn't want something attached to you. You didn't like the idea of a pump. And we discussed many times it has potential advantages to you. But I think at this point, if I remember rightly, you'd gone through the stages. The performance was not where you wanted it to be. The growth wasn't where you wanted it to be. Things were getting really tough. And that maybe opened a window to say, look, I know you don't want a pump, but how about 2 weeks? A 2-week trial. If you don't like it, you can give it back. No problems whatsoever. Let's see how it goes. What was your initial thoughts about going on to the pump? And in this case, you obviously was going to go for the Omnipod because you didn't want something with a wire on. What was your initial thoughts before going on?
Um, I so if I go back a bit, I was a little bit reluctant even to get a CGM. So, and I thought at the time that that was still quite big. So the thought of having another thing on my body, especially as a girl who's, in a swimming costume, wanting to, go out sometimes, um, it was just the thought of having a more bulkier thing, and I didn't want it because I didn't like the look of it, and it just, the size of it, really, I was really like, oh my God, this is not what I just didn't, even though there were so many benefits of it. I just thought, well, I don't really want to change it every 3 days, and then you know then just keep having to do it, rather than just having a quick injection and then it's over. um but I do remember it did kind of come down to a point where, I think it was like 2023 Christmas, and it was like my annual review, and it was like, well, your health isn't doing well, you're not doing well, your performance is really not where it should be, and your growth is not where a teenager's should be. Um, you it was like a you need to go on the pump. So I do remember then go on the pump. I came into Birmingham Children's in the diabetes centre, and I just got one on, and then I just cried. I just didn't want it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I think I said to my dad, I said, give it a year, or I'll just let me have it for a year, see if I even like it, or just give me a couple months, weeks, I don't care. Just let me get used to it. And I'll see if I like it. And if I don't, I will just give it back. But a couple years down the line, I do still have it because the benefits from it was so much better, even though still I don't like it. Like the feel, like sometimes the feel of it's not the nicest. And it's just like trying to find different sites that would work. Um, but it was just the feel, the look, the size, it was just all of that. But now it's it just outweighs all the negatives. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this was sort of from the earlier days of when you first went on, and obviously there's a big difference in terms of timing range, but I think the overnight seemed to be the biggest thing. So as an athlete, you need to recover, you need to sleep, you need to be able to fuel effectively, and that overnight sleep is such a huge part of it. And if we think back to your previous download, all the lows overnight that are waking you up, all the challenges and the highs and the nutrition not going in, and you pair that with um, obviously the difference here. And I think it's just really interesting to hear you say, I still don't like it, like aesthetically wise and physically wise, but overall, for me, so I can remember seeing your growth chart all of a sudden picked up. I remember you coming back saying, I'm smashing PBs again. I'm getting up there in the front of the races and things. And just to see that smile on your face for me is better than any. These numbers are just numbers. They're just whatever. But to see you like smiling about your performance and your PBs and your training was going well was a bit of magic for me. I'd be interested to, obviously you've described it there, what kind of your mum and dad's um I just don't know the perception at that point because obviously you were probably quite keen for the pump, but then you also had this situation where your daughter was like, hell no, no way, and then probably caught in the middle.
Yeah, and this is where I think this had to be driven by Caitlin rather than us, because we could see, along with you, the conversations we'd had, that she should have gone onto it far sooner, but it had to be right for Caitlin so that she didn't then resent it as something that was forced upon her. Um, that for me, I think, was the most key element to it because it had to be driven by Caitlin. The fact that the numbers, I think she probably would have liked the numbers not to be as positive as that. So she could, could have been justified as to why she didn't need it. But it created better sleep. It created almost overnight the ability to, have 3 or 4 nights of full sleep, not constantly going in. Um, but strangely enough, it did come with its own problems because, as you said, her growth suddenly did increase, which then actually created its own problems because of that sudden growth spurt. She ended up with Oscar Slatters. And it was just like, oh my God, can't we have a break? But from a numbers point of view, from the diabetic numbers anyway, it was the best thing for Caitlin to do. But it for me, and my wife, it had to be driven by Caitlin. That was the most important thing in that. Even though we knew it was the right decision, even though everything was pointing to that, Caitlin, it's her body, it's centered around her, and that is the most important person in our life for those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I wanted to show this because I know from what you've said, the thought of going low during training was something that was extremely just wasn't going to happen. So we talked about getting back in control of the insulin conditions by going back into manual mode prior to training. And this is just a little show here of this orange patch where you would go into manual before, get in control of the insulin conditions, manage it, and then flick the loop back on afterwards, which we sort of experimented with at the beginning. The reason why I wanted to show that is there's a lot of athletes who need to or want to be in control of their insulin conditions, and having one of these systems up and down in the insulin both before and during sometimes can be problematic and a challenge. So it is something that can work well to give people both the benefits of the loop overnight and during the day, but also remain in control during those activity periods. And obviously what we're presenting here is like the most amazing picture the first like month or two afterwards. But the reality is now your timing range is sitting at about 60%, and good enough is good enough. So, kind of when it's the balance between life, training, etc., you've now got the performance on the uptick, you've got your weight and your obviously performance is going on that way as well. And it just doesn't have to be perfection. It just needs to be good enough so that you can get the best balance of both ways. So what I wanted to hear is kind of find out about your latest thing that you've done. So this was, how long ago did you do this event?
This was what we call Intelligent Race Day.
2 weeks ago, was
No,
it?
it was last Saturday, the
Okay.
13th. And it was just a day, it's Intelligent Race Day where you do like skill, it was a swim one, and it's with British Triathlon in the academy. And it's just a day where you learn like build your skills in the water, and then you do like race simulation where you would just simulate starts of triathlon races. And we did four of them, and
It's an intense day of training,
Well,
basically.
I mean,
That has to
I'm
be.
looking at it and I'm thinking that is a serious kind of 4 or 5 hour
It,
set of
it,
things
it,
to do.
it was, and I think if you go back to some of those, the reason we turned off our insulin was so that because we didn't know what style of activity it was.
Yeah.
So if it was aerobic, that would cause the insulin to go down. And because she was coming into a sport right after school, she still needed something to eat. So unfortunately, it was insulin on board. And I think the biggest thing, and know I've spoken to you about this, is that if you can go into doing your sport without any insulin on board,
Yeah.
it's
Some
far more
previous
manageable. But if you end up not being able to do that, which Caitlin couldn't because she'd finished school and then an hour later would be then doing her sport, it meant there was always going to be insulin on board. So we had to learn how to overcome that. And by when we knew it was going to be aerobic sports, generally the running sessions, we had to turn it off.
Mhm.
When it was anaerobic and it was in the swimming side, we would actually be able to keep it in activity mode. And this day was actually all on activity mode. We didn't actually turn it off at all, but we just realized that everything needed to be checked in those time frames.
Yeah. And if we've got some action shots of you on the way here that your mum
Yeah.
and dad have kindly sent to the type of things that you were doing. It's obviously you've got the three disciplines there, you're swimming, you biking and you're running. And so I guess what we've presented here is a journey of someone who was a sort of a young athlete or sporty person before diagnosis, obviously then going through the type 1 journey, and having some serious challenges along the way, leading to sort of performance and emotional challenges that you've overcome through support by people, and Molly and your community around you. And I think there'll probably be a lot of healthcare professionals. There'll be a lot of people with diabetes and obviously other people who may be tuning in and listening to this. What would you say to someone who's just maybe been diagnosed now, or you're a healthcare professional who's about to go and see someone who's just been diagnosed, who's sort of into sport? What sort of things would you say helped you, or what would be your messages from them? That could be Caitlin, that can be mum and dad as well. Maybe you've all got something different to say.
I'd say that if like just don't stop doing sport, there's always a way around it. Yes, it will take, a lot of trial and error, but at the end of the day, um, I think just keep going, and it's not going to stop, like diabetes, it's not going to stop you from doing what you want to do. Like it didn't stop me, and I'm still almost 6 years down the line, and it's like almost benefited me. So yeah, don't know what you want to say.
Yeah.
And
I think we were incredibly lucky to be under Birmingham Children's Hospital. And when I found out that you were very, very sporty and also type 1, my head exploded because for me, you totally understand the feeling. And so that was a really good link for Caitlin because I can show empathy and we look after the whole time, but I don't really understand that feeling and what it's like to be a type 1. So that was massive. I also think that, again, in a weird way, we're fortunate that James, her podiatrist, not that I want him to be type 1, but he is, and he looks after her feet. That's another massive support, and he understands that if she does get that sore toe, that he gets her in straight away because he knows that that can escalate. I think. I think from a parent's point of view, we were just very fortunate at the hospital, and people were supportive and positive, and helped us. But I also think that the ownership has to be on the parents as well to meet the medical profession halfway and say, what can we do? It shouldn't all just be left up to you guys. But some people can get to grips with it and other people can't.
yeah, I think it's the positive nature.
Yeah.
It's the fact that the professionals that we spoke to who were positive about encouraging that were fantastic. And not everyone was like that. We had plenty of people who said, "Oh, you're diabetic, you can't do it." And thankfully, we had obviously yourself at the start who made it said, "No, no, we can definitely deal with this. It will take a bit, it'll take some work, but we can do it." But if we'd had those people as the first person saying, "Actually, this is really difficult. It would be better if you didn't do this," that would have been incredibly negative on our journey because everything would have then been a resentment and it wouldn't have been a what can we do to make it better? It would always have been, yeah, it would have been just negative. So the most important thing is being positive, showing that it is possible with work and making sure that, the parents and the doctors are not necessarily thinking about themselves as what's best for the child, but also the child realizing that these are the good things that happen. And we're not just telling you to do it because we're the grown-ups, we know what's best. It's got to be that self-driven from in this instance, Caitlin.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I kind of I put this together before we spoke, thinking that this would be sort of a roundup of really the discussion and the journey before we get into some questions from the audience. But it just really made me think that people need people. Is, kind of the technology is amazing. You've got hybrid closed loops, we've got CGM, we've got pumps, but those therapeutic relationships with the people who you see, those relationships with your dogs, with your family, and having understanding and having the ability to hold the space while people come round to decisions on their own grounds, which I think you've explained really nicely. And that type 1 diabetes doesn't mean that someone's talent is lost. It's just constrained, and you are going to constrain it or enable it by, again, being positive or not. Um, and yeah, understanding that you're an athlete first and you've got type 1 diabetes along with it, rather than having type 1 diabetes and trying to be an athlete. It's two very different things. Something which I think is important because it's very easy with these kind of sessions to go, oh, look at this young lady. She's a triathlete. She's like in the national squad and it's all brilliant and it's all easy. The reality is it's a blooming hard journey that has required so much resilience, support, effort time, energy. And I think for me, that's the big story that's, kind of come shining through is positivity first, grit and determination is a necessity. And but you're gonna need a lot of people and support along the way, both the person with and also the family as well. So I just want to say thank you for sharing your journey with us, and the people who are listening I'm sure are grateful too, and I'm sure there's some things that they've picked up that'll be helpful with people that they see. But I think that's probably the perfect cue to open it up for some questions from the audience, which I'm hoping that Emma and Hope have been keeping a hold of, and they're gonna ask us the questions, and then whoever they're directed to can have a crack at answering them.
Nice. I'm just looking to see if we have any, but I can't actually see any at the moment. So if you do have questions, please could you write them in the Q&A box, and we were going to answer them now. I can't believe
So
that.
while those are coming in, then I'll go with some more questions then. So what's next? So obviously we've talked about the journey and stuff. So what you're in the regional and national squads now, is that right? So what
Yeah.
what does that what does your training today look like? And not as in today exactly, but you explained your training regime when before you were diagnosed, which is like an hour a day and then a bit of competing on the weekends. What sort of level, what sort of intensities and things are you at the moment?
So on a Monday, it's an hour and a half of swimming, and then but like half an hour of before that is pre-pool, just a bit of land training, and then Tuesday's 2 hours of swimming. Wednesday is an hour and like 15 hour and a half of running. And then I would have in that morning, there is not, I do sometimes do the hour and a half swim training at the crack of dawn, but and then Thursday I don't really have a session. It's usually if I get homework done there, but if I do, and then I'll do a hour or two cycle. And then Friday there is a swim in the morning for an hour and a half, and then there's an hour and a half at night. And then Saturday, if I'm not competing, then there is hour and 45 of swimming, and then there might be a bit of yoga after that. And then there's 2 hours of running, and then Sunday, long cycle, and then 2 hours of swimming.
Wow. I mean, I am exhausted just hearing you say that. Never mind having to actually do that. So yeah, I mean the nutritional demands and the yeah, just the dedication is pretty insane. And someone just asked there, how old were you when you was diagnosed? What age were you?
9.
Nine. Yeah, and you're now 15 now?
Yes.
I'm 15, yeah.
Okay.
So TriStar for those in triathlon, that was TriStar 1. It was basically the second year in which you can actually compete. And she was following her brother who was already doing regionals with TriStar 2. And basically, if her brother could do it, she was going to do it.
Ah, yes, that's it. So we've got a question here. Do your during the event, what's your kind of decisions or feeding of carbs? So let's just say before you start, if your glucose levels say 6 or 7, I know it'll depend on what you're doing, but directionally, what sort of are you taking carbs before you start, and how long do you check? How often are you checking in as you go?
Um, like depending on what it depends on what type of race or event I'm doing or what time of the day it is. Like if it's in the morning, let's say if it's at I don't know 11 o'clock or something like that, I would have a really good breakfast. Typically I'd have like a bowl of cereal, and I'd have with some yogurt, and I'd have like orange juice or apple juice, just to really get the carbs high because it's a main energy source. And then if and then I look at what insulin it is. So if I had breakfast at 8 but I'm racing at 11, I might give the full amount of insulin. But if I was racing at, I don't know, 9:30, I might knock off a little bit of insulin so that it doesn't like I might give 75% of that insulin, so that I don't end up going low, because obviously before a race I'll have a warm up, so that will naturally um lower the bloods.
And is that different? So you mentioned that breakfast would the
Mhm.
amount of insulin that you take off change if it was later in the day, or is like breakfast a particular tricky time?
Um, yeah, breakfast is a bit tricky, not gonna
Yeah,
lie.
I can remember having these conversations like you only take 25% off. Like, sure, it's got to be more than that, but then like just you can see behind me, you observe and the glucose level lies. If the levels stay in target, you find the strategy that works for you. Whereas then typically during the day you was taking half off, is that right? If it's a little bit later in the day.
Yeah, I think yeah, and it did depend on the type of exercise. Like if it was triathlon, if I was doing a race, um, I would just always, like after my warm up before I get in the water, I would just always have a look at like what is it? Do I need like a gel? Do I need just like like a small bit of a banana or a pan of chocolate, just half of it, so that it's not too stodgy on the stomach and I'm still able to run without a stitch.
Yeah.
But I think from the nutritional side, it's basically keeping everything balanced. It's making sure that in the morning, when if she's racing at 12 o'clock or if she's doing something at 12 o'clock, it's the fact that she can have the full insulin because that will have come out of her system by that time. So we would make sure that it's high carb, it's got the fats, it's got the proteins, not a problem. But when she's training in the morning, she needs something before she goes in. And because of that, it will be something maybe with only half a unit of insulin. So at least it will start to work. Um, but we'll tend to go with like the the nut bars, those kind of bars, rather than it being the the full sugar pan of chocolats. Even though those are the treats, the chocolate crepes work, but having those, Nutri bars type things work a little bit better because you do have the carbs, you do have a bit of fruit in there, ish, give or take. Um, but then while we're training, is making sure that um, we've seen, are your bloods going up? Are they going down? So if they're going down, do we turn off her insulin? If they're going up, do we change to activity mode? But being aware that at every 20 minutes, 25 minutes, just checking the glucose levels. Now, we got it completely wrong on Tuesday, and that's one of those things. She ended up having to have two gels, and these were specific talk gels, which are um, done for type 1 diabetes, and they are on prescription. So it's not energy gels as in the sports
Mhm.
gels. It is specific for quick release. And then within those 20 minutes, it means that we can keep track. We can do the small amount of Lucozade. We can then do, and it will always be the non-fizzy type. Otherwise, she'll feel bloated.
Yeah. I think there's a question here which I think what you spoke to earlier, which is yeah, kind of what do you do to do your last carb meal? So I think you said that in an ideal world, get it in 3 hours before with a full insulin. So most of that insulin on board is gone. That is the easier to manage, which will help there. And then similar in terms of going back to manual mode, being in charge of the insulin conditions. And it was it about 90 minutes before you would try and stick it on if possible, if you knew you were going to do for that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, here's so I know you do you're involved with Breakthrough T1D and you certainly have spoke at events and you have spoken to other young athletes as well. What has that been like in terms of meeting other people, sharing your experiences and hearing their experiences?
It's been quite nice. Like just like trying to help others with an experience to come, or like just trying to if I'm talking and they just want to learn a bit about what I've learned, I think just sharing I think that's just quite nice, and listening to other people's stories is quite inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, it's also you kind of, you're in it together and it's interesting to hear what other people do. And I'm sure also it's quite inspiring for them. I mean, anyone who listens to how much activity you do, first of all, I think you're mad, which is fine. But second of all, to do that and try and keep control of glucose management with the complexities that that level of activity brings is yeah, it's no mean feat, that is for sure. We've got a question here. Do you ever account for the proteins that you eat in terms of insulin dosing or not?
Um, Dad.
Um, a little bit. So, and actually, it's not necessarily the proteins that we're actually really focused on. It's more the fats, because for Caitlin specifically, it's the fats that have a big impact. It's the proteins that don't. There's another swimmer that's pretty close to where we are, where I know they have to actually deal with the proteins far more than they do the fats. So, um, Caitlin loves a pizza, but the pizza is the killer. It'll go up, it'll go down, and then it will do another bump up back. But if she was to have eggs on toast, it almost creates a perfect balance for her because the protein is there. And it for Caitlin, and I can only speak on Caitlin with this, the protein side doesn't have the drastic effect that I know it has on other people. So for us, that particular question there, I'm afraid we can't really answer that, but the fats we can because the fats have a much bigger effect.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of a little bit meat to the bones there. I mean, certainly from people on much higher protein diets, usually baked into your carb ratio, you include the effect of a little bit of protein. It's just because you have it in most meals, and that's why you're describing when you have um, egg on toast versus cereal, you have a very different response because the egg helps slow things down and makes things more steady. But as you're describing there, and you should also be commended for the rocky road that you make and you bring in occasionally for the diabetes team. That is enjoyed by everyone. But in terms of managing that for myself personally, that's involving a couple of laps around the block after I've had a piece of that. So, but yeah, the high fats is the delayed absorption of the food, which you might go low first, and then just when you think it's all good, then the glucose level tends to spike later on once the insulin's finished. Is never an easy thing, especially if you like it. And you've got the volume of food that you need to eat as well for all that training, makes it impossible to have purely healthy food all the time. You obviously have to include some high calorie stuff in there, otherwise you're just not going to get the calories. So absolutely right to have some pizzas. Okay, so I think is that coming up to time? 3:15. Helen and Tao got one last question. So you got time for one last question, Hope?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Okay, one last question. So last question just on play-by-play stuff. If you've done a big training session in the evening, how many grams of carbs are you trying to refuel within the meal afterwards? And are you also having a sort of snack before bed as well?
Um, it depends what my mum kind of wants to cook that night sometimes. No, if after a training session I might have my mum might have done spaghetti bolognese or basically it'd be like a really high carb meal. So
Are we,
I
we're
want to
talking
say
like
like
70, 80, 100 sort of
we're
grams?
talking like yeah, 90 pretty
Nice. Okay.
much. And then I might have a little pudding afterward, like an ice cream. I don't know, it depends.
And then
Think
do you
it
have snack before bed?
no,
Okay. So you just
not
go for the
really.
big meal with a pudding.
Well,
Cool.
I think what's really important is that when she has done her sport, she has to have something. If she doesn't have something, she will go low in the night and it'll be appalling. And um, when we finish the session, it is 9, 10 o'clock at night at times. So as long as she has something, now that could be
Eggs.
toast, it could be eggs, it could be this a cereal bar, it could be as long as it's something, because the muscles are still working once she's finished that exercise. Um, she needs to have those carbs refueling herself because otherwise at night it will create a crashing low. And it's that point of, yes, you need to get up, you need to have these gels, we need to have the Lucasade. Yeah, it's
Not fun.
it's not fun in those times, is it?
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to you as a family, and especially you, Caitlin, for a young lady of 15 to come and speak so clearly, precisely, and honestly about your experience. I'm sure has been really just encouraging and helpful for people listening, and also to John and Anne Louise for coming, sharing your insights and your support and your family network that you have for Caitlin as well is clear to see. So thank you for giving an hour of your time. I'm sure there's loads of people who have taken a lot from that, and certainly for me, and I know the story, and I still loved hearing the story. So well done.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that as well. Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thank you, John and Anne Louise, and also John Pemberton, for taking the time this afternoon. It's I can see all the messages coming in thanking you. So I really, really appreciate it. So thank you all so much again. There will be a recording of this webinar shared with you. So if any colleagues missed it, then please do pass it on, and as many people as possible can benefit. So thank you.
Yeah.
And
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.